Tell us what you do. Put it in simple terms for us.
Yeah, most certainly. So I run a company, like you mentioned, Podcasting You. And in a nutshell, we basically help folks go out there and build a personal brand, market themselves through the power of podcasting. So we place our clients on podcasts so that they can talk about what they do and really promote themselves at the end of the day.
Interesting. So, who would be a typical client?
Yeah, so really anyone in the real estate space, whether that's on the investing side, you can imagine like your multifamily investors, your self-storage investors. And then if we're talking on the real estate agent side of the business, it's typically someone that is looking to either build their personal brand or they either have like a coaching program, course, mastermind. Because really people go on podcasts because they either want to build a personal brand or they want to promote something. So usually it's a mixture of those two different types of people.
Maybe a real estate agent will come to you and you will have relationships with podcasts in essence and say, hey, if you want, we can get you on this program. Is that in
Yep.
essence how it works?
Yep, exactly. And when it comes to like say like real estate agents specifically, even when I mentioned like having a product, it's because the podcasts are typically going to be nationwide. So if you're wanting to target podcasts, say just in the Providence area, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, which is why it usually if
Right.
someone wants to have go on podcasts and they are an agent, do they have to have some sort of product unless they just don't care and they just want to say, hey, I've been on X, Y, and Z podcast. But yeah, it's a little more difficult to be very niche down. Like we can sometimes do it in like bigger markets if someone's in like the Boston market, maybe the New York City market. But if it comes to a smaller market, say like Providence, it's a little more difficult, which is why we usually target nationwide because I mean there's so many more opportunities going national just than just staying in your local geographic market.
KPI, what does that stand for?
Yeah, so that stands for key performance indicator. And really what a lot of people do is when they're going on podcasts, they want to know how are the podcasts doing? Am I getting anything out of it? Because it's not like running a Facebook ad or a Google ad where you throw $1,000 at it and you can see how many people called your business or submitted a form. When it comes to podcasts, it's a little bit more of a gray area. We can't see the metrics on how many people are listening to a specific show. So that's where it's nice having those KPIs where usually more or less than not, people will set up a specific landing page on their website for each interview that they do, or they'll have a call to action where they're going to send the listeners to. And then more often than not, when the podcast goes live, the host will send an email and say, hey, the podcast has gone live. And then you can check, okay, more people booked a call with my company today than they did yesterday. More than likely, it's because this podcast interview went live. So it's just nice having those KPIs just to be like, okay, like,
Yeah.
what am I? Was it worth going on this podcast? Was it not worth going on this podcast? So it's just nice having those. That way you can track some sort of metric.
What do you feel is the future, rather, would be a better question of podcasts because it's starting to really gain legitimacy and strength compared to legacy media.
Yeah, I think it's just going to increase. I mean, I've been in the podcasting space since 2015. So when I started my show back then, it was almost like uncommon. People thought you were different per se if you started a
Yeah.
podcast. Where today
Yeah.
it's a lot more normal. Like I know, like you mentioned, Joe Rogan. I'm just thinking of like Trump's podcast that went out there. Like I don't know if a political candidate would have gone on a podcast 4 years ago or
Right.
8 years ago, and you look at his episode and it has like 20 million views on YouTube within one day of it going live. I mean, that's so many people, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or undecided voters. I mean, that's pretty big and influential. Where I don't know if people they look at the news and a lot of the times it's depressing or maybe it's one-sided, whether you listen to Fox News or you listen to CNN, more often than not, they typically have agenda depending on who you're looking to vote for, where now people can listen to a political candidate where they just get to hear from that individual, whether it's, Kamala Harris or it's on her podcast she's gone on or Donald Trump or even the VPs on the different shows that they've gone on. I think it just gives people more of a medium to listen to these shows. So I anticipate, not just politicians, but other people continuing to go out either start their own podcast or be a guest on podcasts because it's just a way to directly reach people and control the narrative than necessarily all the legacy media that's out there that's putting out these stories.
Just to play a little devil's advocate here, why is everyone, okay, not fit to be a podcast guest on the other side?
Yeah, I would say really the biggest reasoning is they don't have their branding down. They don't have a website. They don't have a lead
Okay.
magnet. So it's really the folks that aren't set up. And I say that from experience because we've had clients that are very successful, but they don't have a website. So you could imagine someone listens to you on a podcast and then they go to try find more about you and you don't have any social media set up. You don't have a website set up. Yeah, it's good, but it's kind of a waste of your money at the end of that. You really just want to make sure that you have a website. You want to make sure that you have a product or service. And if you're newer, it's going to be a little bit more trickier. Not to say that there's not podcasts out there for people that are just starting out, but you typically want to be established, someone that's been in the business, say 3 to 5 years and longer. That way you can hold down an hour conversation on a podcast and have, good stories, good experiences to share. So it's usually the people that are just starting off that someone might say, I want to go on a podcast, but you might be a little too early in the stages. You really have to build up that business experience.